She ripped the head off my favorite stuffed bunny while locking eyes with me and said, "Well, now it seems realistic. Bunnies die." If I ever got new clothes, she'd take them without permission, return them stretched or dirty, and laugh at my reaction. For my 10th birthday, my mom gave me a necklace I wanted for months. The next day, Claudia flushed it down the toilet during an argument, then gaslit me. "You probably lost it. You are always careless." School was worse. She made up stories about me, spread embarrassing lies to my crushes, and mocked me in front of her friends. If I earned good grades, she accused me of trying to make her look stupid. If I struggled, my mom would tell people I was slow. My parents brushed it off as sibling rivalry, insisting, "You two need to get along. One day you still only have each other." But I realized early on Claudia didn't want peace. She wanted me humiliated. By high school, I'd perfected the art of staying out of her way, but she kept digging. When I joined the debate team and won competitions, she called me a desperate nerd trying to look important. When I was accepted to my dream college, she sneered, "Don't get too excited. You'll probably fail and come back." I'd been looking forward to my graduation party, not just the celebration, but the chance to enjoy something I worked for without Claudia overshadowing me. My parents let me host it in our backyard. I invited friends, teachers, and relatives, planned fairy lights, a taco bar, and a playlist I spent hours creating. Claudia was furious. She started with passive-aggressive comments. "Why does she get a big party? I didn't set." She had one but didn't enjoy parties then. It's just high school. Nobody cares. I'm going to be so bored." I told her directly, "If you can't be nice, stay out of the way." She smirked, "Don't worry, I'll make it memorable." That should have warned me. At first, the party went smoothly. Then she struck. She turned up the music to deafening levels, playing songs she knew I hated. When I asked her to stop, she loudly told my guests, "Oh, sorry. I didn't realize the party dictator was here." During dinner, she accidentally spilled Coke all over the dessert table. Cake, cupcakes, fruit display. Everything ruined. Her sarcastic apology. "Oops, my bad. Guess you're dieting today." Then came the worst. While I was talking to my old English teacher, Claudia grabbed the microphone and started a speech I hadn't asked her to give. She recounted humiliating stories, some exaggerated, others completely made up. She peed her pants in middle school. She once cried for an hour because I ate her cookie. Don't worry, she'll be a great college student if she can survive without mom packing her lunch. People laughed awkwardly. My cheeks burned. When I tried to take the mic, she yanked it away. I snapped and told her to leave. She rolled her eyes. "Relax, it's just a joke. You're so sensitive." She walked off, but the damage was done. The celebration's mood collapsed. People tried to comfort me, but all I thought was, "She did it again. She couldn't let me have this one day." I cut contact completely. No replies to her texts, calls, or her snarky apology. "Sorry if you took it the wrong way." For 6 months, she acted as if nothing had happened. At family dinners, she sit beside me, asking about school as though we were close. If I ignored her, she say, "Wow, still holding a grudge. Get over it." Then at Thanksgiving, she jabbed again. "You are acting like I ruined your wedding or something. It was just a high school party." I looked at her and said, "It was my celebration. You ruined it on purpose. You've been tearing me down my whole life, and I'm done giving you access." And I meant it. I stopped inviting her to anything, left family group chats, and told my parents, if she there, I'm not. The guilt tripping started immediately. Last week, my mom called saying Claudia wanted to talk. She put her on speaker without warning me. Claudia Sepp's first words, "So, are you done being dramatic?" I hung up and tossed my phone at the dorm wall. My hands shook as I picked it up and blocked Claudia's number for the 15th time that week. 20 minutes later, my roommate knocked, laptop in hand, with a strange look. She showed me Instagram messages from 3 new profiles, all created within the hour, sending long texts about how I was mentally ill and needed help. The usernames were random numbers, but the writing style was unmistakably Claudia. I screenshotted everything, saving it in the evidence folder I'd built on my laptop. The next morning in the cafeteria, my roommate sat across from me and asked if any of Claudia's claims were true. I could see her doubt. I showed her a video Elisa had taken at my graduation party, Claudia's entire speech and my attempt to grab the mic. My roommate's face shifted from confused to horrified. She said my sister was deeply unwell and asked if I'd told anyone. That afternoon, I went to the college counseling center. I sat outside for 10 minutes before walking in. The receptionist handed me an intake form. Under family relationships, there was a checkbox for familial trauma. I hesitated, then checked it. 3 days later, I sat in Dr. Maro's office, telling her about the bunny, the necklace, the graduation party, everything. She listened quietly, then said something that lifted a weight off me. What I'd experienced wasn't sibling rivalry, but systematic emotional abuse. That night, Albert found me crying in the common room after my dad left a voicemail accusing me of pulling the family apart. I told Albert everything. 20 years of being humiliated, he said. No wonder you flinch when people raise their voices. Later that week, I was alone scrolling through old family photos. In every picture, Claudia smirked or played with me, tugging my hair, grabbing my arm, stepping on my foot, while everyone else smiled. How did no one see what was happening? A week later, while studying, someone pounded on my door. It was my mother, with Claudia behind her. My mom said we slept talk like adults and tried to push past me. I blocked the door. Claudia screamed that I was too emotional and selfish. My RA heard and rushed over. I told her these people needed to leave. Claudia shouted. She was my sister and had every right to be there. Campus security arrived within minutes, escorting them out while Claudia yelled about me, ruining everything. The next day, I met with University Legal Services. They helped me file a no trespass order and explained that if her behavior escalated, I could request a restraining order. That evening, Elisa called from home, exhausted. She said Claudia was telling everyone I'd had a mental breakdown and was making things up for attention. High school acquaintances were messaging Elisa, asking what was happening. She defended me, but admitted Claudia was convincing. 2 weeks later, Dr. Maro gave me articles about narcissistic abuse, reading about gaslighting, public humiliation, and how abusers act like victims when confronted made everything clear. I wasn't crazy or too sensitive. I was angry, and for once it felt right. 2 days later, in economics class, my phone rang. I let it go to voicemail. My dad's voice sounded tired. Claudia had been crying for weeks. Her therapist said family reunification was critical to healing. I recognized the manipulation, but my chest still tightened. Albert found me in the library that afternoon and suggested we lock down my social media. We spent 4 hours creating new accounts with false names and strict privacy settings, blocking everyone connected to Claudia or high school. Each block felt like another brick in a wall between me and my old life. Midterms kept me busy, and soon it was Thanksgiving. My parents promised Claudia would be at her boyfriend's dinner in Chicago, and that I'd be safe at home. Against my instincts, I drove 3 hours home for 2 days. But as soon as I stepped through the door with my overnight bag, I froze. Claudia sat at the dining table, sneering. My mom appeared from the kitchen. We need to hash this out as a family. I turned, walked out, and drove straight to Aunt Susan's house. She opened the door in pajamas, surprised to see me with a suitcase, but pulled me in and made coffee. Over store-bought pumpkin pie, I told her everything from the graduation party back through years of abuse. Her face darkened with each story until she finally said she'd always wondered why I was so quiet at family gatherings. The drive back to campus was slow from holiday traffic. At midnight, I unlocked my dorm to find the door slightly ajar. Nothing was missing, but everything felt wrong. My diary on a different shelf, laptop open though I'd left it closed, dresser drawers slightly out. My skin crawled. Campus security took a report, but without forced entry or theft, could only increase patrols. 3 days later, I told Dr. Morrow. She explained the pattern of escalation. Losing control over me was making Claudia desperate. We spent the session creating a full safety plan, which included emergency contacts, documentation, strategies, and routines for different situations. On my way back, I got an email from an unfamiliar address. It contained old Instagram photos I had deleted months earlier, altered to look compromising, with my face placed onto other bodies in inappropriate poses. The message was short, but the style was unmistakably Claudia's, along with her threat to send them to my professors. I went straight to campus police. They treated the blackmail seriously and brought in a cybercrime detective. She explained that blackmail is a felony and that they could trace IP addresses. An investigation was launched that afternoon with a case number and evidence log. A week later, while studying in the library, my mother called, yelling that Claudia told her I was trying to have her arrested for nothing. She begged me to drop the charges, claiming I was destroying my sister's future over petty fights. I hung up mid-call. Albert, who had seen everything unfold, mentioned my situation to his parents during their weekly video chat. His mother, a social worker, invited me to spend winter break at their home near Cleveland. When I arrived 2 weeks later, she sat with me in the living room and calmly acknowledged my experience. It was the first time an adult had taken my side without excusing Claudia or trying to reconcile us. When I returned to campus after winter break, the nightmares began immediately. I dreamed of Claudia standing in my doorway, sitting in my classes, or waiting outside my job at the bookstore. They felt so real that I woke at 3 a.m., checking my door lock 3 or 4 times before sleeping again. My roommate grew concerned as I got up repeatedly at night to check locks and windows. The lack of rest wore me down, but I couldn't stop myself. 2 weeks into the semester, Elisa sent me screenshots that made my stomach drop. Claudia had been messaging our old high school friends with false claims that I stole money from our parents and developed drug problems in college, even saying I begged relatives for cash. Elisa said most people didn't believe it, but some started to ask questions. One afternoon, while I was in the library, the detective handling my case called. They had traced the blackmail emails to a coffee shop just blocks from Claudia's apartment. Surveillance showed her using her laptop there at the exact times the emails were sent. The detective confirmed they had enough evidence to press charges. The next day, I met with the prosecutor downtown, who outlined the process. Claudia would be arrested, arraigned, and likely offered a plea since this was her first offense. Then she warned me of what I feared most. 3 days later, during economics class, my phone buzzed non-stop. I stepped out and saw 5 missed calls from my mom. When I called back, she screamed that I was evil and destroying the family, even saying I couldn't be her daughter if I went through with this. My father then spoke, his tone flat and cold. A week later, I sat in the back of the courtroom with Albert and Dr. Morrow beside me. My hands shook as Claudia was brought in for arraignment. As expected, she pled not guilty. The judge released her on bail with a no-contact order. Leaving with her lawyer, she turned, stared straight at me, and mouthed words I could hear clearly. That afternoon, Aunt Susan called as I walked back to campus. She had been speaking with relatives I hadn't seen in years. Many admitted Claudia had mistreated them too, especially younger cousins, but they had been too scared or embarrassed to say anything. Susan was compiling a record of her behavior going back to childhood. The stress made school nearly impossible. Even with the no-contact order, I kept looking over my shoulder in class. My chemistry grade dropped from an A to a C in 3 weeks. Dr. Morrow diagnosed me with PTSD and scheduled twice-weekly sessions. 2 weeks after the arraignment, I was doing laundry when I noticed 3 new voicemails from my mom's number. She never left messages, and when I played them, it wasn't her voice. The prosecutor added witness intimidation charges the next morning, playing the recordings in court. Claudia's bail was revoked, and I watched from the courthouse steps as she was led away in handcuffs. Instead of guilt or sadness, I felt relief, like I could breathe again. The next morning, a courier delivered an envelope from a prestigious Columbus law firm. Inside was a letter urging me to reconsider my stance, warning against breaking family ties, and hinting at possible defamation claims. Albert found me still holding the letter and immediately called the prosecutor, who reassured us this was a common intimidation tactic. Still, I couldn't stop thinking about my parents spending thousands to defend the sister who had tormented me my entire life. A week later, Dr. Morrow spent an afternoon helping me draft my victim impact statement. Each line felt like pulling out glass shards. I wrote about the bunny, the necklace, the ruined graduation, and the countless small incidents that added up to 2 decades of pain. She guided me through the words when I broke down, reminding me this was about reclaiming my voice. That same week, Albert's mother officially offered me their guest room for the summer. Sitting in their kitchen, she told me how she had once cut off toxic relatives herself, reminding me that chosen family can be stronger than blood. For the first time, I felt stable ground under me. Meanwhile, Eliza had to give a deposition. She showed the prosecutor and Claudia's lawyer the graduation party video frame by frame. The prosecutor later told me it was strong proof of targeted harassment, especially the moment Claudia grabbed the microphone as I tried to stop her. 2 weeks later, I was helping Albert's mother prepare dinner when pounding shook the front door. My mother was outside, shouting that she knew I was there. Albert's mom told me to stay in the kitchen while she answered. But I heard everything. My mother barged in, yelling about Claudia going to prison and asking if that's what I wanted. When I stayed silent, she crossed the room and slapped me hard across the face. Albert's mother immediately dialed 911, while my mom screamed about family loyalty. Police arrived within minutes and arrested her for assault. At the station, I filed another report. The detective explained that family violence often escalates during legal cases, which didn't make me feel better about watching my mother handcuffed. The next day, I returned home while my parents were at work to collect what I wanted. Sitting in my old room for the last time, I remembered Claudia smashing my jewelry box, tearing posters, and stealing my diary to read aloud to friends. I left most of it, taking only a few photos and my debate medals before closing that chapter for good. A month later, the prosecutor informed me Claudia had been offered a plea, 2 years probation, mandatory therapy, and a permanent restraining order. I thought it was fair, but Claudia refused, insisting on trial. The prosecutor said narcissists often prefer court because it gives them an audience to play the victim. 3 days later, a package with no return address arrived at Albert's house. Inside was my old stuffed bunny, its head crudely sewn back on with black thread. A note read, "Fixed it for you. Signed Mom." It felt more like a threat than an apology. Meanwhile, Aunt Susan continued digging, finding old report cards with teacher notes about my withdrawn behavior, journals I thought were gone, and childhood photos showing me flinching from Claudia. The signs had always been there, written by teachers, counselors and coaches who noticed something was wrong but never connected the dots. 2 months later, I did something I never imagined. I booked a small room at the student center and put up flyers for a support group for people who had endured family abuse. At the first meeting, I sat with my notebook and 3 chairs in a circle, waiting anxiously to see if anyone would come. Ashley arrived first, followed by Ben, and then a girl who went by Kay. We mostly sat in silence for an hour, but before leaving, Ashley broke down talking about her stepfather, while Ben shared how his older brother used to lock him in closets. By the 4th session, our group had grown to 12 members, and we needed a bigger room. The following week, the prosecutor informed me the trial was scheduled for 6 months away. I tried to stay focused on my classes, but when I received the notice that I would be required to testify, I immediately vomited in my dorm. Albert held my hair as I leaned over the trash, and Dr. Marrow used the next session to remind me I had already faced the worst and was stronger than I believed. One afternoon, Mrs. Chelsea from back home found me in a grocery store aisle. Before I could step away, she hugged me tightly, saying how much my mother missed me and how poorly she looked without me. The guilt overwhelmed me, and I abandoned my shopping cart, driving home in tears so heavy I could barely see. 2 weeks later, things escalated. Claudia's lawyer filed a motion claiming that my testimony should be dismissed because of my mental health. They requested access to every therapy session I had with Dr. Morrow, including my private notes. Morrow explained how they would try to use my PTSD diagnosis against me, twisting it to make me look unstable. The judge restricted what could be used, but Claudia's lawyer was still permitted to question Dr. Morrow in court about my condition. Around that time, my former English teacher reached out through Facebook. She recalled finding me crying in the restroom after Claudia humiliated me during lunch back in high school. I had begged her not to report it then, afraid it would only make things worse. She offered to testify about what she had witnessed through the years. To process everything, I began writing in a private blog, releasing memories I had tried to bury. It felt like draining poison from a wound. When Albert read some entries with my permission, he simply held me while I cried. A month later, my father sent a letter through my lawyer. He was filing for divorce from my mother after her arrest for aiding Claudia. He admitted he had failed to protect me, but insisted Claudia shouldn't go to jail because she was still his daughter. He suggested therapy for all of us. I read it several times before discarding it without replying. At my next meeting with the prosecutor, she showed me footage that made my stomach turn. Security cameras near my dorm, the library, and the parking garage showed Claudia following me for weeks before the blackmail began. She had studied my schedule, planning times I'd be alone. The prosecutor explained that this level of premeditation would make the charges far more serious. Not long after, I was sitting in psychology class when I heard a cruel laugh behind me that sounded exactly like Claudia's. My chest tightened, and I couldn't breathe. I quickly gathered my things and left, spending an hour in the restroom practicing breathing techniques Dr. Morrow had taught me. 2 weeks later, in Dr. Morrow's office, she introduced EMDR therapy. As I followed the moving light bar, I thought about Claudia tearing apart my childhood bunny. I cried harder than I had in years, but afterward, the memory felt distant, like I was viewing it through glass instead of reliving it. The next day, Aunt Susan called Albert in tears. She had spoken to her daughter Sophia about the case. Sophia admitted that 6 years ago, Claudia had cut her wedding dress to shreds the night before her marriage, convincing everyone Sophia had done it during a panic attack. Sophia had been in therapy ever since, believing it was her own breakdown. Now she realized the truth and wanted to testify. Aunt Susan apologized for not believing me sooner. Gradually, my grades improved as I learned to separate the case from schoolwork. My economics professor even offered me a research assistant position after I aced an exam, The first good news I'd had in months. At the pre-trial hearing a month later, I read the transcripts online. Claudia's lawyer argued that it was a private family dispute, not a crime, but the judge firmly ruled that the evidence of planning and the seriousness of the acts made it criminal. One Tuesday, while heading to class, I saw security officers rushing into a building. Inside, my mother was holding a poster board reading, "Forgive your family." Students recorded on their phones as she shouted that I was destroying our family and that God would punish me. Security restrained her, and she was arrested again for violating the restraining order. That delivery with my torn-up childhood bunny had arrived shortly after Claudia rejected her plea deal. I couldn't help wondering whether my mother was behind it or if someone else wanted to warn me of what was coming. 2 weeks later, the prosecutor prepared me for trial by role-playing as Claudia's lawyer. She drilled me with questions designed to make me appear angry or unstable, but always stopped to remind me to breathe and answer with facts. During one courthouse session, I found Ashley, another support group member, crying in the restroom. She shared that her sister had abused her for 2 decades, and she too had filed charges. We exchanged numbers and began talking daily, both relieved to be understood. Albert later discovered a USB among my old belongings. It contained home videos from my childhood. In every one, Claudia was caught on camera pinching me until I cried, pulling my hair or ruining my toys, while my parents stayed focused on filming, oblivious to her behavior. Just a week before trial, Claudia's lawyer told the Columbus Dispatch that I was a troubled young woman, seeking attention and fabricating stories about my loving sister. The claim spread across social media within hours, with old classmates picking sides. My campus support group responded by sharing their own stories of abusive siblings. Albert's mother reached out to colleagues and uncovered 3 therapists who had treated people bullied by Claudia at previous jobs. While confidentiality prevented them from testifying, they all confirmed she had a clear pattern of targeting one person at each workplace until they left or broke down. The prosecutor explained that this established a trend, even if indirectly. 2 weeks later, I attended jury selection. One woman was excused for saying families must always forgive, while another man was removed for saying sibling conflict is normal. The prosecutor emphasized that relatives, like anyone else, can be abusers. 3 days before the trial, Dr. Morrow scheduled an extra session. It hit me then that I had spent my life hiding how bad things really were with Claudia, trying to avoid making my parents choose sides. I had worked so hard to be the good daughter that I let Claudia wear me down completely. The night before trial, Albert and I reviewed notes in my hotel room when I received a call from an unknown number. It was my father, drunk, slurring that he wished I had never been born because none of this would have happened without me. Albert ended the call, leaving me trembling. The next morning, Elisa arrived from California. We stayed up late going through old yearbooks, with her pointing out photo after photo where I was visibly avoiding Claudia. She recalled how teachers dismissed my tears as sister drama. On the first day of trial, opening statements began. Claudia sat in a conservative dress she would never normally wear, dabbing her eyes with tissues as though she were the victim. The prosecutor presented evidence spanning 20 years of escalating abuse, while Claudia's lawyer insisted it was exaggerated sibling rivalry. The second day, the prosecutor played the graduation party footage. Jurors shifted uncomfortably as Claudia grabbed the microphone, with her lawyer objecting repeatedly. The judge allowed it, calling it relevant to a pattern of behavior. During recess, I saw Claudia in the hallway. She gave me a fake sweet smile and mouthed, "I love you, sister," with mocking eyes. I rushed to the restroom and vomited. Later that day, I testified. I described the bunny from when I was 5, the necklace she flushed, the rumors she spread, and the years of targeted humiliation. My voice faltered only once, when recalling finding my bunny's severed head in my school bag the next day. Several jurors looked visibly unsettled. Cross-examination followed. Claudia's lawyer tried to paint me as jealous, bitter, and mentally unstable. He twisted my words, but I repeated calmly, "That's not true," sticking to facts as Dr. Morrow had taught me. When asked why I never reported earlier, I explained that my parents had dismissed it as normal sibling behavior. After I finished, Mrs. Keller, my former English teacher, took the stand, having traveled from our hometown to testify. She presented an old teaching diary, filled with notes about finding me crying in the hallway, often right after seeing Claudia. The entries were dated, detailed, and showed that her concerns went back years. Next, the prosecutor called my cousin Monica. She looked small and nervous as she walked to the stand, gripping a tissue. She spoke about Claudia's wedding 3 years earlier, where she had been a bridesmaid. The night before the ceremony, Claudia poured red wine over her dress while laughing. At the wedding, Claudia convinced everyone that Monica had ruined it herself in a drunken, jealous rage. Monica broke down describing this, while the prosecutor showed photographs of the dress and text messages where Claudia bragged about it to friends. Her voice trembled as she said Claudia enjoyed hurting people. Some jurors wrote notes while others looked unsettled. When Monica stepped down, the cybercrime detective took the stand with a large folder of evidence. He laid out the online harassment campaign in full. He presented IP addresses tied to Claudia's devices and timestamps, proving she sent abusive messages at all hours. My photos had been edited into disturbing images and spread across fake accounts and obscure websites. The detective explained how organized it was, even showing spreadsheets Claudia kept to time her messages for maximum psychological impact. During the lunch break, I sat alone in the hallway when my father appeared. He looked older, his suit wrinkled, his eyes red. He apologized quietly and admitted he finally saw Claudia for what she was. I didn't forgive him, but I nodded because there was little else to do after everything that had passed between us. That afternoon, Claudia testified in her own defense. She wore a plain white dress, presenting herself as a victim. She cried and claimed I had always been jealous, inventing stories because I couldn't stand being the less successful sibling. Her lawyer asked her simple questions, and she answered in a voice softer and sweeter than I had ever heard, pausing to dab away false tears. Some jurors appeared sympathetic, until the prosecutor began cross-examination. He pressed her on the video from my graduation party. She denied it at first, but when the footage was shown, her entire expression shifted. The prosecutor kept pressing with more evidence until she lost her composure, shouting that I deserved it for always trying to make her look bad. The courtroom went silent, and I saw jurors lean back as if realizing they had just seen the real Claudia behind the performance. The following day, character witnesses testified. Teachers described me as a steady student who suddenly began missing classes once the harassment escalated. My manager from the campus bookstore remembered finding me crying in the storage room more than once. Albert spoke about my night terrors. Elisa presented messages where I begged her to explain what I had done wrong to anger Claudia so much. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying Claudia's testimony in my mind, even knowing the truth. Her ability to lie so easily made me question myself, because years of gaslighting had conditioned me to doubt my own memory. I stared at the ceiling until morning, realizing how close I was to believing again that I was the problem. The fifth day was for closing arguments. The prosecutor laid out the progression from childhood bullying to stalking and harassment, showing how it escalated after I cut contact. He emphasized Claudia's lack of remorse, despite overwhelming evidence. The defense lawyer argued this was a case of family conflict spiraling out of control, not a crime deserving prison. While the jury deliberated, I sat in the hallway with Albert holding one hand Elisa on the other side, and Aunt Susan across from us. 20 years of memories suddenly made sense, like realizing your childhood home had been built on toxic ground. It explained a lot, but didn't lessen the damage. Susan leaned over and said, "Whatever happens, you've already won by breaking free." I wasn't sure I believed her. 2 hours later, shouting came from outside. Security officers ran toward the entrance. Marlene had returned, breaking her restraining order, yelling at reporters that I had destroyed the family. She tried to push inside, reaching toward me while screaming that I was a liar. Guards restrained her until police arrived. She was arrested again, and the bailiff told us to return inside. We spent the rest of the day waiting with no updates. The next morning, the prosecutor told us the jury had asked to review the graduation video and all the cyber evidence again, a sign they were taking the case seriously. I couldn't eat, barely managed water, while other hearings played out around us. Around noon, Dr. Marrow came and reminded me that no matter the outcome, I had already won by standing up to Claudia. For the first time, I realized I wasn't afraid of her anymore. On the third day of deliberations, the bailiff appeared and said the jury had reached a verdict. My hands shook as we returned to the courtroom. The foreman read the decision, guilty on all counts including harassment, blackmail, and witness intimidation. Claudia's face shifted from confident to shocked to furious in seconds. As the judge moved to scheduling, Claudia suddenly lunged across the defense table toward me, screaming that I had ruined her life. Officers restrained her as she kicked and threatened me. The judge struck his gavel and added contempt of court to her charges. Sentencing was set for 6 weeks, with prosecutors indicating she now faced 2 to 5 years in prison. Outside, reporters waited. I gave a short statement, saying I hoped my case would encourage other survivors to seek justice, even against family members. Back at Albert's house, I collapsed, crying for hours while his parents quietly cared for me. The support group held a small celebration the following week. One member told me my case gave them hope they could confront their own abusers. Soon after, I received a letter from Aiden with a check for my education fund, which Marlene had tried to withdraw before the restraining order. He explained he had left her, filed for divorce, and started therapy. He admitted his failures, but said he was trying to change. 6 weeks later, Claudia was sentenced 3 years in prison, 2 years probation, and mandatory psychological treatment. She was dragged from court yelling threats, and the judge issued a permanent restraining order banning her from contacting me or coming within 500 feet once released. For the first time, I felt like I could breathe freely. At my next session, Dr. Morrow helped me name what I was feeling. She said I was grieving the family I should have had, not the one I actually had. That explained why I didn't miss them. I mourned what never existed. 2 weeks later, Marlene sent a letter through her lawyer, stating she had disowned me and removed me from her will. That night, Albert and Elisa came over, and we burned the letter in my backyard fire pit. Watching it turn to ash felt liberating. 2 months later, I legally changed my last name to Smith, Albert's mother's maiden name. His family had already welcomed me as their own, and they were thrilled. Signing the papers felt like removing chains I had carried for years. By sophomore year, everything was different. My grades improved, I earned a research position, and helped expand the support group from 5 to over 30 members. Trauma no longer controlled me. That Thanksgiving, Aunt Susan hosted a dinner for me, Albert, his family, and Monica. We cooked together, laughed, and for once there were no fights or insults. Albert's father raised a toast to chosen family and new beginnings. I cried, happy tears this time. Later that semester, I published an anonymous story in the university newspaper about sibling abuse. Within days, my inbox filled with messages from students who had similar experiences, many sharing for the first time. I started a weekly coffee meetup for anyone who wanted to talk. By December, Dr. Morrow pointed out that I hadn't mentioned Claudia in weeks. She was right. I hadn't even thought about her. The fear was gone. In January, Aunt Susan told me Aiden had moved into a small apartment, started therapy, and joined a support group for parents who failed to protect their children. He wanted me to know he was trying but understood if I never saw him again, maybe someday, but not soon. By spring, Albert and I rented a small apartment near campus. One evening, we sat on our second-hand couch, planning our schedules. My phone stayed quiet. No angry calls, no threats, no guilt trips, just peace. For the first time since childhood, I felt safe.